All right. We're back. Kelly, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much, Al. You?
I'm doing well. Thanks for joining us. And I'm extraordinarily excited that you have agreed to contribute today. I mean, I love your podcast. I love what you're
Thank
doing in
you.
the space. I love how MZ has been an innovator. So, what do you got in store for us today? And again, I'm really excited that you're here. So, thank you.
Thank you, Al. And I feel the same way about PAFOW. Like it's just always great information coming out our way. So I am thrilled to be here as well. So yeah, today I planned on talking a little bit about skills, sharing, my history, and I've been in this for a while, and talking a little bit about what is coming up for 2021. And I think maybe just a few of my predictors being in the space of what else I think beyond MZ might be hot topics around skills.
All right. Well, I'll get out of your way. Have at it, and talk to you in a bit.
All right.
All
Thanks,
right.
Al.
All right.
Thank you all for joining me today. I am really excited. Of course, we had to title this as Let's Talk About Skills, Baby, which is also the title of my podcast series. And just absolutely love, talking about this all the time. This sort of came up, especially the name of that is because we've been talking about skills for so long. It was sort of like an inside joke that we pulled up the name from, but just a song we always sang and just transitioned out the word that is normally there to skills. So I thought I would start with this wonderful quote by Josh Bersin, because in all honesty, I think it 100% sums up in one quick little couple sentences here. The reason behind the evolution of skills as the currency to drive talent mobility. So I'll read this out because I know there is a picture behind it for everyone to see. But in today's world of work, jobs are changing so quickly that the old-fashioned idea of building a competency model and formal job description is not keeping up. Companies need systems that can continuously identify the skills that drive success, organize and arrange these skills so people can find them, and systems that help individuals and managers develop themselves for the skills of the future. I think, like I said, that really kicks us off strong here. So let's talk about skills, the history, right? Well, let me tell you guys a little bit about how I got into this, because EMSI is actually the third labor market analytics firm that I have worked for. I don't think there's a ton of labor market analytics firms out there, especially in the US. So it's fairly unique. I ended up starting in this I was with a startup in about 2006, and that startup purchased a failing startup. And the failing startup was actually the first patenter of job scraping. So if anyone even knows what that is essentially like right when Indeed was starting and they were able to pull job postings from a bunch of different places. That was kind of a new concept. And that's when we got our hands on this new startup. We ended up, the small but mighty team ended up coming up with an idea with one of the clients at the time, which was the Department of Labor in the state of New Jersey, to use these job postings and create analysis out of that. And we ended up being acquired by Burning Glass Technologies, which I know we'll be on later today. I helped Burning Glass build their business for many years and then transitioned out to continue this good work around skills at EMSI. So that's kind of my view into this world, but really to talk a little bit about, what you see here, which is what I call, I think traditionally going back probably even more years than I've been in this, traditionally the communication between the components of the work and education ecosystem were pretty difficult. I tend to call it the triple E game of telephone, meaning employers, employees, and educators, and the various ways that they were using information to communicate to each other. So if some of you have been around this long enough, you've probably heard SOC, SIP, all of those good things, but we were always trying to communicate. And basically apples to oranges is difficult, right? But skills was this wonderful like translation layer that everybody was kind of, sort of using, but not really. And at least definitely the data at the time was not using this, but it was just such a wonderful way for this ecosystem to operate more effectively. I mean, I had seen this again. I have been in this a long time, right? I have seen this when I was working for a subsidiary of Randstad. This was even back in 2005. I was placing IT consultants. And in all honesty, it was basically manual skill-based hiring that was happening. I would hear from the hiring managers, what a job wreck for any of those out there in the staffing world. I would hear from them a laundry list of skills, typically an advanced degree. My team of recruiters would go out, find someone that fit like 70 to 75% of the skills on that list. And then I would be there to convince them that this was the right fit. So this was happening even that long ago. I saw this again in 2007, 2008, which, sort of a mini COVID situation, right? We had the Great Recession due to the financial crisis that happened. And again, I mentioned in the state of New Jersey, one of the clients of this small startup that I was working with was the state of New Jersey's Department of Labor. And when we had these super high unemployment numbers, the interesting thing was companies were coming to them saying, hey, we have open jobs. But there was no way to make the connection until we started looking at skills, surprisingly enough. And I would say, over the years, I've even experienced it personally because I've helped. Of course, people tend to just come to me because I work in this field to help them with their resumes and job searches. And I've seen it time and time again as I help them write a resume and determine what am I going to put on my resume? How am I going to communicate this to a potential employer? How will I know what the right things are? It's always been there. It's just never been there in a super scalable way. So I think what this really was is it was leading to the birth, if you will, of real-time labor market data or analytics around real-time labor market data. Because the only way to figure out and where people were talking about skills, or where I should say employers were talking about skills, was in their job postings, in those job recs that I mentioned I was manually writing down many, many years ago. But of course, how can we scale looking at that information? Because me just going out and manually looking at a job posting and going to find a person, that's not going to be super helpful, right? So job postings, though, were super messy because, as you guys might know, and as I described in my experience with these hiring managers, they typically just gave me a laundry list. They did it. Sometimes they had an old job posting, but there's no standard when it comes to writing a job posting. So I could say whatever I want to say. I could put whatever title I want to put. We just needed some way to, see what was in that in a way that was not super standard, but a little bit standard, if you will. And so that's really where skills taxonomies started coming out. And I would say this was even almost a decade ago when the first proprietary skills taxonomies were being developed. And it was really a way to help people, I should say the other thing about when, a decade ago, most people in general in our field were just totally thrown by the idea that you could use real-time data to make decisions because it was so unstructured. So there was a pretty hey, this is super crazy. But the people that really believed in it thought if we could help kind of create a structure to this, could we, could it be something that would be super useful? So those initial skills taxonomies really were looking at sort of this format. I use this visual here up on the screen because it was really this structure that we were all familiar with and comfortable with and trusted, which was ONET, or, anything that had sort of this, government approach. I know there was obviously SOC coming out of this as well, but that was sort of how we initially started looking at skills, was in this format that we could create and we could align so that we were able to then make comparisons from this real-time data back into the structured standard data that we all loved and trusted. So again, that is a decade ago, and I cannot believe it's been that long ago when I say this out loud. But, the sort of the the next step to this, what I would say was a few years ago, and this is, where I'm bringing EMSI into the mix, because a few years ago, there were still some challenges to having skills in this taxonomical structure, because skills really, again, there's still to this day, no standard around job posting, but I would say about 4 or 5 years ago, obviously there still wasn't either. There still isn't today. But, the structure of this meant that we had to really manually update, just like we do ONET. And that was causing an issue because, as I described in that quote that I read when I first started, right, everything was changing so quickly. Automation due to AI has rapidly accelerated over the last few years. There were so many things that were making jobs change so quickly. And again, we just couldn't keep up with this structure. So here at EMSI, what they decided to do was try to go about this completely organically. I think the popular term right now is this sort of ontological approach. But let me just give you guys a quick analogy. This is like my favorite analogy to use, because sometimes data, it's like, I know we're all sitting here with people that are probably really comfortable with data, but sometimes it's really hard to imagine this, especially if you're not in it the way that I have been for many years. So I'm going to use this wonderful analogy. So on the right-hand side of the screen for a moment, think of what you're seeing here as sort of like looking up at stars in the universe. So skill words themselves are the stars themselves in the universe. And the only way that we really start to see, create a story around the stars in the universe is sort of where they come together as a constellation. And we call that skill shapes. I'm going to come back to skill shapes in a moment, but let's talk for a minute about the stars themselves, which are the skills themselves. Everything is sort of moving constantly in the world of work. And so when we look at this in this very different approach, like again, a complete flip of this taxonomical model. And here was the exciting thing when we created our open source library. We actually combined for the first time demand data, so job posting data, as well as supply data, or people data coming out of CVs, resumes, social media profiles, of course. It was the first time that we decided, hey, let's look at both of these and let's not create a structure around it. Let's just look at them how they are, wild in the universe as stars, right? Let's just see what happens, because if we do that, maybe we don't need to update it as often. And then as the job market changes, we can automatically see those changes in a real-time fashion within this particular way that we are approaching this library. So that's the reason we call it a library and not a taxonomy. Like I said, I'm going to come back to skill shapes in a minute, but just so that if anyone is not aware of this, I really want to share, because I think it is so fantastic that EMSI did decide to open source their library of skills. The library of skills has over 30,000 different skills that have a uniquely identifiable machine readable tag. And that is a really important feature that we're going to come back to again. They have their own skill web pages with additional labor market information around those skills. So things like we've sourced Wikipedia definitions when they're available. We've even pulled in sharing related skills, as well as some basic labor market information. I'm going to let you go out to the site to check it out. It's skills.emsidata.com. But we also include a limited access to our skills extractor so that you can actually read skills off of job postings, off of people's profiles or resumes, and off of learning content. And it's updated every 2 weeks. This is insane. Open source, because a lot of times, again, going back to those proprietary taxonomies, what was happening, one of the huge challenges was that it was really expensive to purchase into. And then when you brought it into your organization, there was a lot of customization because they were created for a particular organization to use internally. So this is a way for, number one, a way for you guys to have access to something that you don't have to purchase into. So that was sort of like up to today, a little bit of like history up to today in terms of where skills are. And what I want to talk about, going back to the skill shapes for a moment, is sort of where we see the future going in terms of skills. So skill shapes essentially are a way to define or give context to skills. I'm really not even wanting to use the word definition because, again, when you create a definition of something that constantly changes, you then need to update that. So I'm going to actually say context, and I'll probably have to change a slide because I see that it says defined. But context around skills. So think of this for a moment. If I have communicate, I might talk about communication skills. If I'm in a PR related role, my level of communication skills is going to look very different than if I'm working in an advanced manufacturing facility, let's say. It could look really different based on different jobs as well. So, the shapes themselves, think of them as sort of like unique identifiers of a person, of a role. I say role instead of job, of a region, of even education, because essentially we all have our own unique skill shape, right? I mean, all of us have different layers, different education backgrounds, different work history, and we all bring something unique to the table. And this gives us a way to look at the context around these areas. And the cool part is it's sort of unlocking this future capability to match between these various players in the ecosystem, right? Our people, our employees, our employers, and our education or learning and development. So this skill shape approach is really sort of this like future, the foundation of the future when it comes to skills. So I'll leave you with a couple more things here. And then I want to open up just to kind of have a little bit more discussion with you guys, is that, initially skills as this translation layer, when you think about it from an organizational perspective, it was allowing the internal, let's say, allowing all of the data that you house internally to be translated so that you could use external labor market data to make some interesting decisions. You might want to look at compensation data to know if you might want to look at what other competitors are doing. There's a bunch of different things, which was a fantastic, that translation layer, fantastic. But what the future looks like around skills is the ability to actually connect this information internally so that talent mobility is unlocked in a whole awesome new way. And I'll leave you with this one, maybe slightly wordy slide, but I'm going to talk you through it for a minute, because what we were doing was, again, what I would say the middle piece, which is what is called is the sort of external approach where you can use external data to make better decisions internally. But I think what we really want to see is how we can unlock that internal data so that you're making extreme personalized decisions. So I'll leave it with that from an EMSI perspective. But the last thing I'll say, which I would love to chat about with you guys, is some of the other things I see from a skill perspective in terms of like future of work are things like the learner employment records, which are taking off. Open skills standards work, like the Open Skills Network, how that might make huge changes to what, how we're actually able to translate from a skill perspective across all of these areas. One of the things I think that came up really strongly in, especially in 2020 with COVID, is sort of the importance of mental well-being of our employees. And I really take that back to life skills. That's what I talk about all day long within the podcast, is just, how people build up what I think many of us would call like growth mindset. But it's this culture within this organization, and how can we help people build up those capacities because they are learned skills? And how can we also understand their passions so that when we're creating these scalable movement of these people, that their, thoughts and processes are actually still really taken into account? Even things like talent pools expanding because of remote work. And you think of like, I'll loosely say diversity, equity, and inclusion, because I think of, for me, I'm a mom, and I think a lot of parents out there are dealing with this, but especially women. We're seeing mass amounts of women leave the workforce because of childcare issues this year, and they're especially women of color. So how do we handle this sort of expanding pool, but also at the same time, a little bit of a certain areas that are not expanding? So I'm going to take a breath here for a minute because I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'd love to come back with you guys and, who's here in the room with us today and have a quick chat about it.
All right. Kelly, I thank you, number one. Number two is I'm just really taken aback because I'll just be completely open. I mean, you have, I've heard the concept of skill shapes before. Mm-hmm. But you have an uncommonly clear narrative on why that language is appropriate. I think we have struggled in people analytics in general, HR even more broadly, but certainly when we talk about skills databases, it seems like overwhelming. We're talking about thousands and thousands of words and concepts, and so how to get our small brains around this big, massive challenge is. It's been an inhibitor. I think many have just balked at it and just run away. But your narrative around skill shapes, I think, is a really, healthy one. How pervasive is it, however? Meaning, is this common language that you're hearing within enterprises, within recruiting organizations, within those who are responsible for, location strategy and internal mobility? I believe my personal bias is that we have a long way to go in educating and finding a common language on this so we can make better, wiser decisions. But what are your thoughts on adopting a more common language so we can actually use these technologies and insights appropriately?
Yeah, I think, in all honesty, well, first of all, I'll say from a skill shape perspective, the thing is that I agree with you. I think this concept is still in its infancy. We tend to create matches between individual skills, which, like I said, it's not telling the whole picture, which is, I think we still have a long way to go there. But in terms of like the open skills standards around this, I think that's just moving us even closer because this has been many, many years that there have been no standards when it comes to writing a job posting. I mean, look, I made up my own job title. Come on.
Global skills evangelist.
It sounds amazing. But what does that mean, right? I mean, and that's the thing, for talent mobility to happen in an open marketplace situation, we need to have some structure around it. So, even if there's a way for people to connect into or utilize a structure, my family owns small businesses. So I actually had to post a job for a new pastry chef because we own a bakery. Okay. And I had to go back and look at other job postings to determine what I was going to put in this job posting because I have never written a job posting for a pastry chef. Now, of course, you would not be, there are not a lot of detailed job postings for pastry chefs, and I know where to look. So if I had a place where I could have been like, oh, okay, there's this place I can go and pull from some common language used for these types of jobs, that would have been so helpful to me. And I can't even imagine that from a scale. This is just like one.
Yeah, no, I mean, I get requests quite often. Oh, Al, do you have a job description for a people analytics leader, people workforce planning? I'm like, okay, here's a Microsoft Word document. Go look. Good luck. Yeah. And so what you're talking about obviously is way more evolved. But Kelly, I'm really excited. I mean, such an appropriate kickoff for today. And for those who participated, know that we're going to turn around the video of Kelly's presentation and audio within the next 24 hours. When we do that, we'll take her slides and make them really, really big.
Were they too small? I'm sorry about that.
All right, Kelly. Thank you again. And we'll talk soon. Make sure for those who not, listen to your podcast because it's really fun and great energy, great concepts and ideas. So thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you so much, Alan. I hope you guys have a wonderful day.
We will. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.